I'm Julia, and I run my account, Julia the Medic. And so I'm in my first year of graduate entry medicine at Warwick. I previously did a music degree at the University of Oxford, and thought I was going to be an opera singer until I decided to do medicine instead. In short.
So talk us through that. So what was the change in path?
Honestly, it's one of those things that's really hard to describe because there are sort of multiple parts to it. The thing that it came down to was I love music. I still love music, but music, you can work really hard, be really good, and it is just a matter of luck as to whether I'd get to do really good sort of opera, or whether I'd just be doing sort of rubbish jobs in the community. And for me, my priority was to do something that I found intellectually stimulating and challenging. And I like science. I was interested in medicine already. So with that in mind, medicine is always going to be stimulating and challenging no matter what you do. So it kind of fell to me in that respect. But also there were certain elements of my music course in which I managed to get certain medical aspects in. So I did a music in the community module. And so one of my sort of finals big dissertation coursework pieces was basically about music therapy in the context of anti and postnatal depression. Wow. So that involved basically doing a lit review on that, which was really interesting. So
that's fascinating. Do you know what? Because it's Maternal Mental Health Week this week. And
what do you know?
I know, this is what I'm saying. And I'm actually not doing any content around it because NutriTank's initiative, Nutrition for Youngsters, which is geared at young people and their families, is doing stuff around Maternal Mental Health Week. But this is perfect. Tell us a little bit more.
Coincidence.
I know, it's actually a bit crazy. Also, I don't know if you've noticed, but just to the audience, because I haven't really sorted myself out since I got back from the hospital. I'm really sweaty, so I've just put a filter on my face. If anyone's probably noticed that all of a sudden I look really smooth.
I mean, I have a ring light, literally. This is on a tripod and I have a ring light. I have the ring light on my, I'm going to show you.
I felt like a bit of an imposter there for a second because I started this off like au naturel and now I'm like smooth as ever, which is not the case in real life, but loving it regardless.
Honestly, I have a ring light for even my Teams meetings because
you know what? I think
gotta own it.
Yeah, exactly. Especially in this virtual world, you've got to own it and you make yourself feel good. Why not? So sorry to interrupt. Back to you. Tell us about your project around music therapy for postnatal and prenatal depression. That sounds amazing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was doing quite a lot of community music in general. So I did quite a lot of volunteering in prisons. So I did lots of teaching music in prisons, but I was also interested in doing something more about health. And that seemed to be one of the things for which there was the most research. Yeah. The difficulty with lots of music therapy related things is it's mainly qualitative research because there's not really easy ways to actually quantify that sort of thing, which is why it's limited in how it's taken off. But yeah, that was really, really interesting.
That's amazing, and such a unique kind of insight into healthcare and into kind of the arts and healthcare. And it's really cool that was actually like your formal degree before, rather than just doing like a music therapy module. And so talk us through applying to postgrad medicine. Had you already done science at A level, or did you have to start from the beginning post music to apply for medicine?
So I did the international baccalaureate rather than A levels, so that I could do lots of different subjects. Yes. I was one of those annoying people. But for Warwick, I applied to two places for graduate entry medicine. I applied to Warwick and to Newcastle, and neither of those require science A levels at all. So I had biology for IB, but I didn't have other science A levels, but they don't require them. So essentially what I did was I did take a year out, and I worked in the hospital in Oxford for a year as a healthcare assistant. And and did my sort of my UCAT admissions test, and somehow ended up here.
That's incredible.
Happened quickly.
I didn't know that was an option, because I know so many people who didn't get into medicine first time round and things like that, or who decide later in life, oh, I want to do medicine, but I didn't do science. And it's really good to know that you can do it without science, and there are two places that you can do it. So Newcastle and Warwick. Epic. And so how's the year been for you? Tell us how it's actually been being a first year medical student in the COVID era.
It's been a whirlwind. I mean, I'm sure it's a very different experience to normal. So we've had things like, I had a community day today, which was done from home. So there's a limit to how you can do things, to be honest. And I've been into the hospitals once because of COVID. So there's limits, but at the same time, I think particularly in first year of graduate entry, it's just all a lot of content that you're trying to learn all at once, so that in second year you'll be able to go out onto placement. But I have enjoyed it. I think it's been different, but what I've noticed that it's different for sort of everyone, regardless of background. So I did a music degree, but I don't think it's any easier or harder for somebody who did biomed, you know, because medicine is its own entity and own weird thing. So I really enjoyed it in that respect, and I've managed to get involved in so many projects and far beyond what I could have expected, which has been really, really great. I think that's probably, dare I say, I mean, I love the content. I do want to be a doctor, but I have really enjoyed the things that you can do outside of the course. I mean, I don't need to tell you that, obviously. You've done many, many things beyond your medical degree during your time.
Oh, but I want to hear what you've done. So tell us how you've got on this year. I'm actually, before we you've done, I'm interested to hear how you found it as a kind of virtual type course, in the sense that you haven't had that community sat physically in lectures. How's it actually been? Because it's amazing, you know, you've still found enjoyment and fulfillment with it. I think out of all the years for it to be online, I agree with you, the first year and the second year, really, it is kind of just learning the content and like the pillars of the science behind medicine. But how have you found it from a kind of social and community point of view?
I think that's definitely a harder thing. Like, majority of people on my course I have never even seen, which is such a weird thought. You know, you're not all in a lecture theatre, which, although, you know, when you're really tired, turning up to a lecture theatre isn't always what you want to do, but actually it is really useful just to be able to even recognise faces. I think you really take for granted the time that you have in between lectures just to chat, you know, which I haven't really had, which has been a shame. And it definitely means you have to work a lot harder in order to get some of the more normal social aspects, you know.
And do you think that you're in a way lucky, the position you're in, because you've had the undergraduate uni experience, and you're not in the same position as, say, someone who's doing first year medicine as an undergraduate, where you really are being thrown in the deep end of university culture, potentially living away from home, and obviously that lack of social connection physically?
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a real difference between, I'm 25, but, you know, being 18, right? But like being 18 and coming into a new environment where you can't actually, I think particularly because the idea of university is put onto a pedestal of being really fun,
the best years of your life,
right? It's your formative years, you know, all of that. But I mean, I was looking at my undergraduate, my college that I went to at Oxford, and it was a really beautiful place, really beautiful college. I loved living there for the 3 years that I was studying. But seeing the people who are in their first and second year there, who have barely been there, and I feel really sad for them. And I think, you know, even at Warwick, which is not as pretty as my Oxford college, but even
I don't
then,
think
like being in
anything's
the
as pretty as
environment,
Oxford. Don't think
I
there's any.
mean, I'm biased, but you know,
I visited, and I just it's magnificent. There's quite nothing quite like it. No, it's interesting. I think you are, you know, no one's good. It's no one's kind of in a lucky position with what COVID's brought. But I think of all positions to be in, it's great that you have done your undergraduate years, and this is kind of like a degree to kind of get a job. So you're kind of in that adult phase of your life. But I wanted to just touch upon something you said, which I think is really important, is what the perceived situation of university is, and all those expectations and the difficulties as an 18, 19-year-old starting. And it kind of brings us nicely onto our conversation around mental health, which I know is something we're both so passionate about.
Yeah, definitely.
So what do you think are some of the struggles when first starting university?
I mean, I think it's just such a world away from your life before university. I mean, I found that going into university for the first time, you're used to sort of being predominantly in one place before that. And so coming into university, different people, more self-sufficient, it can be overwhelming. But there's also, to some extent, more autonomy over getting support, you know? Because in my case, so I started university at 20 because I spent some time in Italy. That's a whole other story. But I got my diagnosis in my first year of university because I felt, because I had a lot of shame and sort of internal shame about talking about my experiences and or thinking about difficult feelings, that was actually the first time that I felt I could approach services and get support for that. So I think there is some benefit to starting university in terms of being able to get support with mental health, but that is the fine balance between, you know, that benefit but also all the changes, all the newness, and to some extent being alone until you find people, that comes with starting university. I think it's an interesting and very strange time.
No, I would definitely agree. And I definitely want to hear about Italy because it's one of my favorite places and my favorite food cuisine. So definitely going
Me
to put a
too.
pin in that. Do you have, are you Italian? Are your family Italian, or was it?
No. So I have some Maltese in me.
Yeah.
And the Maltese side, we suspect, are probably from Italy originally. But I did do Italian in sixth form. I studied it as a language at school. And then I got offered a job as a musician out there. Wow. So of course I had to go. So yeah, it was great. I spent time in Rome. That's where I was based, in the centre.
That's incredible.
Just playing music, drinking good wine, tasting good food. I mean,
I can't believe that
sublime.
Was like, and this was for what? How many years was this for? This wasn't even a gap year. This was for a while, wasn't it?
I mean, it was, yeah, about 18 months or so.
Wow.
Just living the life. Yeah, honestly, it was brilliant.
That's amazing.
It was a very strange time. It was just a lot of making music. I randomly decided to do the marathon while I was there because why not? Haven't run since, but you know.
You know, first time for everything, you try something, do it, tick it off,
Right.
and be like, yeah, don't need to come back to it. Time and a place for every new activity. But coming back to obviously your story around mental health and starting university in your first year at 20, why do you think it was that you had held on to seeking help for so long? And do you think from what I've understood, what you've said so far, are you saying that what university offers is like a chance to restart, in the sense that you had that fresh slate rather than bound by college and you know, people knowing your business there, that you felt that you had the autonomy to ask for help in the first place?
Yeah, so I think it's a big thing. I feel like, in my opinion, I had a lot of sort of internalized shame around
Sure.
dealing with mental health. And realistically, I first dealt with depression when I was maybe, 10.
Wow.
It was very young, really. And I think because it was such a long time running and you're around people you grew up with, you don't really feel like you can begin to talk about that. And I hid a lot of those things. And I think particularly with bipolar, there's a lot of things that people can write off as eccentricity, or when you have those periods of hypomania, mania, you to some extent think the depression's never going to happen again, so there's no point seeking help, because it's never going to happen again. It's all fine. Particularly when you don't know what hypomania or mania is. And in hindsight, there were so many really obvious indicators, but I think particularly when you're around people who you've known for years and years, it can be really hard to talk about those things. And I think particularly when you are a teenager, even though you can reach out to your GP, to healthcare providers by yourself, there is always the fear of parental involvement, which is important and is beneficial, but can be really daunting, particularly if you're talking about things that you feel shame about and thoughts and actions that you don't want to talk about. And I think to some extent at university, there are things available where you can talk about those things with people who don't know you prior to that, and who will keep that quiet. I don't know.
And it's so interesting, I think, because from other people I've spoken to, and for instance for myself with kind of my own experience of depression during medical school, I was kind of the opposite. I was so worried about that as my like professional environment and a place of kind of newer friends, that I just wanted to kind of be coddled back home with everyone who I've ever known and felt comfortable to confide in. So it's really interesting kind of like where the shame lies for different people.
It'll be interesting, actually. I don't know, maybe if I'd done a medical degree to begin with, whether that would be a different aspect, because I think there often is a lot of fear amongst medical students about,
I guess yours was during your music degree, before you kind of had that pressure of, I'm going to be a healthcare professional. That's interesting. Yeah. We'll never know, but I guess it's really important to kind of unpick that further and really try and understand, why people with lived experience have felt discrimination and stigma, and how we can improve the kind of culture within these environments and institutions that we talk about. So yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing that. And to just delve a little bit deeper, so you got your diagnosis when you were in your first year at 20, but you think that as young as 10 you started feeling symptoms around depression. And throughout your kind of teenagehood and onwards, were you always functional with perhaps this underlying bipolar affective disorder? Or were there ever any periods where, school picked up, or anyone else kind of picked up on it to be more clinical?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think, again, it's one of those things where both myself and others can see in retrospect. And I think it's an interesting one of looking at sort of functionality, because I think there's a difference between sort of ostensibly being functional, but not necessarily to your optimum. And I think I was always quite lucky that I was academically able. I did well, such that even when I didn't get what I was predicted to get, or you know, had sort of slip ups, it kind of got brushed under the rug per se, because I was still doing objectively well. But looking back, there were so many really unhealthy aspects. I mean, if I look at my sixth form years, I was doing every extracurricular under the sun. I'd be going into school at 7, 7:30 to do extracurriculars, not coming home until fairly late in the evening, doing work. I mean, often, you know, sleeping 4 hours a night, which I think is a fairly well-known thing if you know about mental health, but that is common in mania. And I didn't feel tired, and I could function that way. And I was just doing loads and loads, and it just seems productive, but it's obviously not good. And on the same side, I think with depression, there's a lot of people who are very high functioning when they're depressed. Even when I've been actively suicidal, even sort of acting out on certain ideation, I've been high functioning. I've done my work. I remember I went to boarding school for a year. Another story, but
how old were you during this? I'm just grabbing my charger, but I'm here.
No worries. So I was 16 at the time. So between 16 and 17, I went to boarding school for a year. Great experience, absolutely loved it. But I was very depressed at the time, and I just remember I would be crying doing my work well into the night, and people knew, including staff. But often, I think it's a big thing that lots of people know that schools don't deal well with mental health in a lot of cases, and that's definitely something I felt, that even when to me it was very obvious that I was crying all the time, or sometimes quite combative, you know, like I had a few arguments with teachers when I was sort of manic rage, but nothing ever got pursued. Yeah, it's a peculiar thing.
Do you think retrospectively, because I mean the reason why I asked, you know, a lot of questions around your symptoms, because obviously, you know, in a textbook you learn the disease, and then there's the illness experience, which is the lived experience of the individual person. And we know that even with multiple people experiencing the same disease, it's all a different experience, and that's why it's so important to treat the individual in front of you. And as you know, because I've shared with you, I'm working on a psychiatric intensive care unit at the moment, and I'm on the male ward, and it's mainly young men in their 20s and 30s with relapses of psychosis, and it's people with schizoaffective disorder, bipolar affective disorder, and schizophrenia. And for me, I'm obviously seeing them at their absolute worst, and I've seen them in an acute, you know, episode of mania. And to me, it's so overt. It's, you know, it's extremely out of the ordinary, with me not even knowing their baseline, because of the things they're saying and the inappropriate activities they're pursuing. What I'm wondering with you is yours type 1 or type 2, and was it ever so out of the ordinary that people did question it, or was it genuinely just constantly kind of swept under the carpet due to a lack of education?
So I think sort of a mixture. So I've never had a specific sort of type diagnosed. It's always been just bipolar affective disorder, because that's what's in the ICD-10. The ICD-11 does make that divide, but that's only fairly recent, following sort of the DSM-5. And I think, to be fair, probably when I was school age, my highs were probably only hypomania at the time, which you can, with hypomania, you really can attribute lots of it to this person is eccentric and really full on, but you can put it off to that. And I think it's only sort of when I've been older that I have had the full-blown
Sure.
mania.
Sure.
So when I was in Italy, actually,
Mm.
a lot of that was incredibly manic, and I was living with friends who I speak to now, who say, you know, I was absolutely off the rails at times, and they bring up things that I'm so embarrassed about
No, of course, yeah.
because you do things that you wouldn't normally do. And I mean, I have experienced mania since. I actually had a manic episode in January, which was in some ways quite amusing. I mean, in retrospect, that is. But at the time, sort of my parents began to suspect things based on my conversations with them. My housemates were really concerned. And my housemates ended up calling my parents to come to the house, even in the middle of the pandemic, because they were so concerned. So I was just like living my best life, and my parents turn up at the doorstep really concerned about me, justifiably so. And I had absolutely no insight to it, which with hypomania you can generally tell. You generally have enough insight into the fact that that's going on, but when you are literally having really vivid delusions, you don't know. And I bought some bizarre things. I bought some bagpipes because that seemed like a good idea. I bought raw uncut black diamonds because that seemed like a good idea. I would go out in the snow wearing a sundress because I'm invincible. I basically, so my birthday is the 29th of February, unusual birthday, but it's also
you're
the
like
same.
5 and you're not
I'm
actually
6.
25.
I had my 6th birthday last year. But that's the same birthday as Superman. And I basically decided that because me and Superman share birthdays, I also had the same sort of abilities as him. And you really do believe that. You are convinced of that. And everyone else seems to be the slow ones, the ones who don't make sense. And it's only really afterwards that you can recognize that actually you're the one you're the one who's totally a world away, you know.
But it's just it's so interesting, and I'm so grateful to you. I think this has been honestly one of the most honest, you know, conversations I've ever had, where you've really given insights into your framework of reference, because I guess the only way to really educate people, and only once you're better, you know, you never want to kind of let someone into your inner psyche when you're in crisis, is to kind of educate them on what was going on and the kind of signs and things for them to pick up in the future. Because I guess if it is swept under the carpet, even when it sounds as severe as what you're describing, that's just so unhelpful for going forward and, you know, detecting it at an earlier stage next time. And I don't know about you, but as cliched as it is, I think, you know, laughter is the best medicine, and being able to laugh at yourself is just like it's actually it's cathartic, I think, laughing at yourself. And I really admire you and rate the fact that you've just been able to list off, you know, the things that you did, the things that you ordered, and like the beliefs that you had when you went through such an acute period of illness, and you're just like, yeah, this happened, this is what I did, and I'm here now.
I mean, it's funny, like I can't do anything but sort of bring them back as funny memories, like, you know, that manic episode, that was, can't believe I believed that. But yeah. I think it's often an important part of sort of normalizing things is being able to recognize it as something that happens and laugh about it, at least
completely.
For me.
Completely. I know, me too, absolutely agree. And so let's talk about kind of the external structures that are in place. So you said you had, you know, your friends and your family supporting you, which is amazing. And what has it been like with, you know, being someone with a diagnosis of a severe mental illness, which bipolar is considered under that umbrella? What has it been like being a medical student with this diagnosis?
I mean, I think I benefited a lot from the fact that I was, before even being a medical student, I was speaking out about my experiences and was open about my diagnosis, to the extent that when I went into medicine, it wasn't even a possibility of sort of going back into the closet about it, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's something which is very easy. I think it would have been harder if I weren't out to then go into medicine and then want to come out about it, I think, because I think I didn't give myself that option, and that was a benefit. And honestly, I haven't had, on the whole, bad reception towards that. I mean, I've literally tweeted about mania and my experiences, and senior members of my medical school have retweeted it. So I know that there's a lot of people who are supportive about it, and I think particularly now there is more discourse around medics' mental health, and to some extent, were somebody to react openly negatively, you could quite easily call them out and get support. I think the difficulty that lies in medic mental health is in the more implicit sort of discrimination, or, you know, people won't necessarily say things on a public platform where they can get that criticism, but doesn't mean that they don't hold those biases. Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. And I do think that sort of landscape is changing. I think what is currently difficult is, although there's a lot of talk, I think when people talk about medic mental health, a lot of it is about stress and burnout, and at most depression and anxiety, which are obviously very important and are the most prevalent things. But there are medics with bipolar, with schizophrenia, with experiences of psychosis, with personality disorders. And I think those need to be equally recognised. And I think it's often a thing, I know lots of people, I've spoken to lots of other medical students who have severe mental health diagnoses, who have been witness to being on placement and hearing professionals talk ill of patients with these conditions, with the expectation that nobody within the healthcare professional team or the medical student will be one of those people.
That's really, really difficult. And I think what's really difficult are invisible chronic illnesses. Because when you're not acutely manic, you're not acutely depressed. I mean, you know, even like we've just said, even when you are acutely depressed, it can still be undetectable. And, you know, I'd say eating disorders are something that can be one of the more visible mental illnesses. But it's really tricky that the fact is it is hidden, and it is your personality, and often you're not able to speak and get to know people as a medical student because you're kind of just there observing. So how is anyone meant to know? And it just goes to show how important it is to change the conversation landscape and to really address these, you know, discriminatory kind of terms that people use to describe patients with mental illness. Because like you say, it could be that you're offending a colleague, and, you know, doctors are also patients, and it's so important, and people are just people at the end of the day. So I think, you know, doesn't surprise me, but I'm still, oh God, you know, that pang of like just anger from hearing it, but I've just heard it all so many times before. And I just to share some of like my own discrimination that I received. And like I say, you know, all mental illness is mental illness, but I agree with you. I think from just like researching and from kind of doing the work that I'm doing now on my elective, unfortunately severe mental illness isn't as glamorized as common mental disorders like anxiety, depression, and you know, even eating disorders are more glamorized in the media, whereas people with severe mental illness like schizophrenia, bipolar, the media is just so negative and so disparaging about it compared to the others. So I think it's really, really tricky when we do want to change the conversation landscape that only some are still being addressed and given that platform compared to others. And yeah, so what I kind of experienced, and yeah, I suffered from depression, and I had a really bad episode on my intercalation year between years 3 and 4 2 years ago. I considered like dropping out of medical school, and I was just like, oh gosh, like it's all coming down on me. But anyway, still here, qualified now, so we make it. But I shared this with a psychiatrist recently that I was with in Bristol, and you know, we were just having a meeting, and he was asking me, why do you want to do psychiatry? And I said, well, I've actually always wanted to do psychiatry. Even before I started medical school, age 15, I was like so interested in mental illness and how the mind works. Watched loads of like films, read loads of poetry and illness narratives around mental illness, blah blah blah. And when I started medical school and I did my psych placement, I realised, yep, still absolutely for me. And then I experienced my own kind of mental illness experience, and I've got a lot of family members who've been affected by mental illness as well. And I said this all to him, and I said it's just always been a fascination to me from my own experience and from my family's experience and blah blah blah. And I went on and on. He's like, oh gosh, okay, well, you know, you've told me that, that's great, but if you're doing your Royal College of Psychiatry you know, core training interview, don't mention that. Don't mention that you've got attachment to it. Don't mention that you've got personal and family attachment to it, because we don't want that. And I was so shocked, because we just had like an amazing conversation up until this point that he asked me. So I didn't see it coming as like, I thought he had like, you know, he had a great character, but it was so, for me, I was just so shocked, because I really thought things were changing. And I know so many psychiatrists with their own
I would have been fuming.
I know.
Go straight to the RC Psych and be like,
I know. I seriously couldn't believe it, because I just think we've moved past that so much. I mean, there's so many stories of, you know, if you read a medical student's personal statement, and I'm not being insensitive, but a lot of people who have had a family member, for instance, go through cancer, that has been their penny drop moment. I want to be a doctor, and the type of doctor I want to be is an oncologist. That's how the human brain is wired, to make meaning out of obstacles, and then you find a larger purpose. So for me, I thought it was really quite damaging that was that was kind of a popular opinion. But
I'm sorry you had that. Yeah. I think it's so damaging that is, and I think to some extent it just shows the extent that there are even psychiatrists who have that internalized shame and stigma against the idea of health professionals having those experiences. And I think a lot of it is in medical education in general. There's a real divide between the patient and the doctor, and not much discussion of the patient doctor.
Completely. You've literally just nailed it, because it's that concept of othering. So if you're in this kind of hierarchical position, I'm the doctor, you're the patient, you're other to me, therefore what you have I can never have. If I have it, I'm ashamed. If I have it, I don't want to be, you know, part of the profession anymore, because it looks bad for the profession. And that is actually what is wrong. It's this huge divide, like you say, between doctor and patient. When people are people, we all get illness. There are so many really moving stories at the moment, and doctor colleagues of mine who are actually in active chemotherapy right now and writing as doctors as patients. It's so important that narrative is out there.
Totally. And I mean, a doctor doesn't have to be the epitome of health, you know, in order to be a good doctor. And actually, understanding health services from another perspective can be so useful, I think. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for, I mean, people who have been through mental health services, because I know what it's like. I mean, obviously every experience differs, but there are certain aspects which I think from a medical training perspective are not given necessarily the right significance. Like, a big example I found is I'm learning to drive at the moment, shamefully.
Same!
Already. Oh my gosh, are we the same person?
What is going on? By the way, I failed my theory on Friday and I'm really embarrassed, but like, whatever, we move on. I passed my finals and whatnot, but I failed my driving theory.
Priorities, come on. Like,
I know.
I think medical finals
obviously, like, my brother, dad and boyfriend are just like rinsing me, like, how have you done academia but you failed? I'm just like, I don't know, but whatever, I'll rebook it.
Honestly, I mean,
funny, but yeah, go on. Sorry, go on.
With bipolar, by nature of having that diagnosis, you have to inform the DVSA that you have that diagnosis. And I think in medical school, you're often told about conditions, you know, where you have to have that informed. But do people actually know what I can't think of a nice way of saying it, like, oh, it's a nightmare actually going through that process. Like, it's a form you have to print off and fill in and send. It's not very obvious. You have to have quite a lot of medical evidence to even go through that. And so the experience of telling somebody to do that as a sort of checklist thing compared to actually having to do that is a very different thing.
Fascinating. That's a very good example. You're right, because that's just showing the objective learning around something. It completely differs to the lived experience, and that is why what's the term being used now? Instead of expert patients, it's expert by experience. So you have, you know, a lot of conferences at the moment, a lot of talks, and it's experts by experience. And I think that is such a powerful terminology that is being used far more frequently, so that we actually learn from the service users and don't just other them. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have service user input, then, you know, how are you benefiting patient care at the end of the day? And how will doctors learn if they don't hear feedback from their patients around practical and logistical issues like what you've just described?
Totally. I'm actually doing an internship with my medical school over the summer, working on introducing more lived experience into the curriculum through working with patient groups and stuff. So, I mean, hopefully more places are trying to encourage more of this, but I'm definitely gonna be sort of forcing all my ethos, all of the things that we kind of discussed in regards to the importance of that into the curriculum. That's my job for the summer.
That's awesome. So tell us, so this really feeds nicely onto discussing how we can improve everything that we've discussed into the medical education space. So how did that happen? Were your medical school receptive? Did it take a lot of kind of plugging for you to actually get to, you know, creating this internship for yourself, or was it just quite an easy opportunity?
So I had some luck. I didn't create it. This was advertised with a member of staff who I've done quite a lot of lobbying of, and who has been very supportive throughout my time. And it just so happened that this came up, and it's got the advert for the internship was quite vague, but it just so happened that a lot of my ideas really align with the concept that they were going for. And I think it kind of led on from a lot of the projects that I'm already working on in the medical school. So I've been part of both co-founding a disability network at my medical school and an LGBTQ network. With both of them, we are doing quite a lot of work in terms of, so with the LGBTQ one, we're doing a consultation on CBL cases and their representation. And this, with the disability one, I'm running some disability training for staff. I'm actually doing a disability and medical education workshop at the TASME conference next week. So there's been some really good opportunities that have come out of that, in terms of, I think with the disability stuff particularly, that's a lot about trying to break down the patient and doctor divide in how things are tackled in the curriculum. And I mean, I'm probably a very annoying person for any faculty, because I will always send an email if I see something
you're talking
an
to
issue with.
you're talking to the most annoying person, in fact, for the faculty. But they're now my friends, hopefully.
Honestly, I had an hour and a half Teams meeting the other day because of really bad LGBTQ representation in an STI lecture the other day, and I basically ended up rewriting it. I mean, and it's something I've had ones about in the first term. I had this very long threads of conversation about nutrition teaching, actually, as well, because that was handled really badly. And I think it is by lots of medical schools. So yeah, I think often making leeway on all these sorts of issues just involves sometimes being a bit annoying.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, it's not annoying. We're young change makers, really wanting to change the medical system to suit the patients walking through the door. It's just not up to date. It doesn't reflect who the members of society are. If there's no LGBTQ representation, if there's a lack of diversity when it comes to skin tones in dermatology teaching, how is that reflective of society? Thank God for Malone.
Absolutely.
Who created the Mind the Gap series.
Yeah.
And likewise with nutrition, that's I won't go into it now, because obviously you've gone to our conferences, you know what we're about.
I know all the amazing work you've done.
But how is it reflective of what's going on in society if we're not being taught how to advise patients on, easy nutrition and lifestyle medicine tips to not only prevent chronic conditions but also manage them? It just makes no sense to me, and it's just
as well.
very exactly.
One of ours, I remember them encouraging people to suggest MyFitnessPal, which, as we know, is the kind of the app of the eating disorder community, without any sort of discussion of that discourse. Oh, it's I
know it's troubling, but I mean, it's amazing. You have to start young. It's like not young, but you have to start at the beginning, which is why it's so good that you are doing this in your first year of postgraduate medicine in the same way that Ian and I did it right at the start, because you'll obviously find yourself busy with clinical commitments, but you're using the insights you get right at the start of medical school to actually make the course change alongside you and benefit and leave a legacy and benefit people in years below you. So I look really forward to hearing more about the disability training that you're giving, and maybe you can give a webinar for our community on that as well, because I think that would be so useful. And with the disability training, is it coming from the expert by experience perspective, or have you yourself done disability training? Because I assume that disability is so broad, from physical reasons, and I've got a medical student friend who's in a wheelchair, for instance, to mental illness. How do you kind of tailor the information for all disability?
So that's actually goes back to my first degree. So during my first degree, I was part of the Oxford Students' Disability Campaign, and I eventually was the chair of that campaign. And during my time as chair, based on the experiences of lots and lots of different students with disabilities, we developed a workshop which was initially for students on being able to accommodate disabilities, even really simple things, things like providing an email address that people can contact about an accessibility need when somebody's advertising an event, even really small things like that. We put together this workshop. I sort of amalgamated all the information and made it into this workshop, which was used across Oxford, and by all accounts still is. And I got a Vice Chancellor's Social Impact Award for that, because it was a helpful thing. And essentially, since coming to medical school, I have repackaged a lot of what I learned from that, also in conversation with other medical students with disabilities, in order to tailor it more to medical education, to students, but also to teaching staff and non-teaching staff as well, because lots of it are sort of applicable across the board. Yeah, and it's been quite challenging changing it to medical education specific focus, but yeah, it's been really interesting as well. Really.
That's amazing. I think it's so cool that when you actually think about it on paper, music and medicine, they are obviously very different degrees. And for me, like someone, I'm really passionate about the arts, and I did my intercalation in medical humanities and creative arts. And for me, like, that is what I want the future of medicine to be. I want the future of medicine to be holistic healthcare, nutrition, lifestyle medicine, the arts, etc., all integrated alongside conventional treatment. And I think what's really cool, what you've done, is that you've actually got transferable skills from your music degree and arts degree, and you did really cool extracurricular stuff there too that benefits everyone. And I think that just goes down to the fact, again, you can take away, yes, you're adapting it for medical education, but you can take away that whole kind of healthcare professional label. It's just general education for people. At the end of the day, we're all people.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter what our kind of role is, etc. And so I know we're going to run out of time, and I actually could talk to you forever and ever. I just wanted to quickly touch upon something I know that's really close to your heart, and what I think you enjoyed the most about our conference, and that is weight stigma. And I just wanted you to maybe share a little bit about how it is to be someone on medication for a mental illness that impacts metabolic health, and how you find life living in a bigger body, and kind of the education that you want to see around that, especially for healthcare professionals who once again internalize stigma, and it's that othering again.
I mean, it's a huge thing, and for me it's been a really interesting journey, because before my diagnosis I was a straight-sized person, but as you know, with your elective, the effect of so many medications in general, but particularly psych drugs, can have huge impacts on your body in general, and that can in many ways be quite a dysphoric thing, because you're trying to fix one thing but you're really out of control in other ways. And it has sort of contributed to lots of sort of eating difficulties in myself, in relation to seeing my body change as I took, antipsychotics, lithium, things like that. And that's a really sort of emotionally difficult thing. I think there is a real sort of balance in many ways, that you're helping your mental health in one way, but actually feeling dysphoric, feeling very different, feeling not yourself, equally has an impact back on that. And I think it's something which is quite nerve-wracking in medical care as well, because I do feel very conscious of my weight when I see medical professionals, including psych, including ones who know that how I am is because of that. And even if it wasn't, that's it's kind of not the point. I think it's a difficult thing, and I found it difficult in medical school, because often they'll refer to things in certain ways. They'll refer to like obesity as a disease, when it's not a disease. That's not what it is. I think lots of the language is harmful and doesn't even when things are medically accurate, they don't normally have nuance. And I think that's something that, particularly with integrating nutritional education, as you know tons about, you can't have these conversations about one thing without talking about another thing.
Yeah.
It's all interconnected. And I think I do feel glad that I have this experience, even though I do still feel very dysphoric in my body. And it's only something which I've been able to sort of have more control over recently, because I'm taking things which don't have those sorts of effects, that I've been able to sort of have ownership of my body again. And I think this is, I mean, it'd be interesting to hear about your elective from this perspective, because I think there is a real, that I see it as, once you sort of own your mind, you feel like you don't own your body. I don't know.
That's really an interesting perspective. And I guess it comes down to, you know, drawing upon the information from the talk that Kimberly Wilson gave at the conference, who is a psychologist and nutritionist, drawing upon the philosophical problem that Descartes created around the mind-body split and the mind-body problem, and the concept of dualism, and how, you know, the mind and the body, they're connected, but they're still separate. And I think that, unfortunately, even though that was in the kind of 19th century, so the 1800s, it's still reflective of what the kind of mainstream practice is within medical healthcare systems at the moment. And I think, you know what, when it comes to acute psychosis, for instance, what I'm seeing now in my elective, unfortunately, you can't do it all together. You can't do it all together because you just have to prioritize what is most kind of important and where the most risk is. And at that point, it is giving patients antipsychotics to be able to restore them to somewhat of a baseline so that they can function. And when I say function, I mean, you know what I mean. It's so that they can actually sleep, eat, just going back to complete basic needs. But I think there is the argument for, once you've got someone slightly out of that crisis phase, and, you know, this is still in a PQ setting, which is what I'm on now, which is where people are kind of in an intensive care unit for their psychiatric illness. Once you've got them, for instance, out of seclusion, kind of out of that really unwell state, and just, you know, really working with them to encourage recovery, so that they can go to an open ward, for instance, that is when I think you can bring in the physical health stuff. And what I'm doing with them at the moment, we're doing cooking programs every Wednesday. There's the mental health nurse, Matt War, who is also on the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Programme, who is head of innovation on that ward, and gets them into the ward gym and does strength training with them, and has seen a 45% reduction in violence because of that lifestyle medicine, physical activity intervention. So I think, in answer to kind of what you've said, I think, you know, it's a whole other IG Live, and it's such a fascinating question. Really, I think there's a time and a place for it, but it is what should be the goal and the aim and the gold standard. It just has to kind of be done in phases, so that you know, you're treating the mind when you're treating everything, but like, if you're really fragmenting it down, when someone's acutely psychotic, you need to calm their mind with medication. But obviously that medication carries risks and can disrupt your metabolic health, and then that needs to absolutely be dealt with as well. And it's unfortunate that that isn't dealt with from a psychiatric best practice point of view.
I guess it's difficult because once you're sort of out of the acute, I mean, we know psych services are so stretched that there really isn't often the space to be able to dedicate that time, to dedicate that practice. And in many ways, it is easier and safer to keep people on those medications as sort of maintenance medications. But I mean, ideological to sort of hope that there could be a move away from solely that, but it's balance again, isn't it? It's all
It's
about
balance, yeah. Because you definitely need the medications, and that's what, you know, especially with severe mental illness, like you need the medications, but you need to do it alongside you know, holistic healthcare interventions as well, so that you're dealing with the person rather than just the problem in the mind, essentially. And yeah, we can just only keep doing what we're doing, Julia, and keep, you know, trying to change it so that best practice really does meet the needs of patient care. And you know, when you graduate, that hopefully you'll be practicing in the way that you want to be, essentially. 4 years time, I think that's a good kind of, yeah, that's a good, let's give that as the deadline for perfect practice. But I know Instagram will cut off soon, so I just wanted to address Pooja's question, which was, so Pooja's one of our NutriTank branch leads, and she just asked, how did your medical school react to your comments on the handling of LGBTQ plus representation, for instance, in that STI lecture?
I've had mixed bag experiences. There have been some staff who are really excellent. I mean, obviously lots of these things shouldn't be happening, but they have dealt with them fairly well, and there is precedent for making changes, but I haven't always had good experiences. And I think sometimes it's a matter of picking your battles and working out strategically, I think, who you can contact. And I mean, I have had staff members sort of ghost my emails because they don't want to have to deal with it. But yeah, I think if you're doing things in a way where they can't say you're being unprofessional because you're speaking in a totally legitimate way and you're making totally legitimate points such that were they to shut them down, they would clearly be the ones in the wrong, making themselves look bad. That's how I found makes them listen, I guess. And I think there is some luck to what staff you have, but I have had a mixture of good and sort of less good reactions.
And I'll just add to that, Pooja, from mine and In's experience around nutrition education at Bristol, and with any issue within medical training, if you detect a problem, you can't present a problem without a solution, because that is where you are creating more work for faculty that's already overstretched, and you're just kind of, they probably know subconsciously there is a problem, but if you're not offering an alternative and you're not offering a solution, that's why you won't be listened to, because they don't have time to think of the solution themselves. So if you are an innovative, forward-thinking medical student and you see a problem in the system, then you need to go away yourself and do the work. And like you did, you saw there was an issue in your STI lecture, so you rewrote the lecture and you sent it to them. That is what needs to be done, obviously with expert input, depending on, you know, what problem you detect, but that is actually what is needed, and then you've made your case.
100%. I think that's the thing. Lots of people can be quick to point out faults, which is good because you should be calling things out, but there also needs to be give and take. You know, you need to entice people, give them something that makes them want to make those changes actively because you're offering something really good.
Yeah, no, I think you've said it to a T, and such a lovely way to end, very optimistic. And it's just been amazing chatting to you. Like, I could go on and on and on. I feel like we've only scratched the surface of such important topics, and I can't wait to, please send NutriTank, you know, the talk you're doing for the conference you mentioned around disability and stuff, and happy to promote however you want. It's just such great work that you're doing. So thank you, Julia, and thank you everyone who's tuned in.
Thank you for having me. It's been absolutely lovely having a chat.
I know. it's been amazing. I think, you know, hopefully, I'm sure we have added value to people as well who find these conversations really tricky. Like you said to me earlier, I'm an open book too, you're an open book, and I think that openness really helps with education and normalizing exactly what you said.
Wonderful.
Amazing. Nighty night, everyone. Bye then.
Bye bye.